once you launch, like how long did it take to hit $1 million ARR?
We've made more than $1 million on our first contract. There's something about maintaining a small enough engineering team that allows us to be like so artistically generative right now. If you were to look at our org chart, our CTO has 15 people reporting them. It gives us such an advantage because we have so few like communication nodes of our engineering team and we're shipping so fast. And because we don't have to think too much about support and sales right now, it's all funneling into product investments. Product market fit for like an enterprise motion like we're doing, it's really different than like a PLG. For us, we met with a certain customer that did a ton of market research into all potential solutions that were in kind of the offensive security space. And they went from market research to deciding to choose Method in such a rapid time frame on a dollar amount that was like unprecedented for us that I knew like this team could have anything. And they chose us, and they chose us very quickly.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Sam, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Pablo, for having me.
So you started Method Security a couple of years ago, and your co-founders from the NSA, you're from the Air Force. We've had a few people. We had Huntress, Kyle was from the NSA, and we had IDME, the founder was from the Army. And I always, in those cases, I tend to kind of gloss over background pretty quickly, just to set context sort of thing. But everybody's interested in what's going on in those places. And so maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you were doing for the Air Force and just like what that world was like.
Yeah. So in a way, I was the user that I am now serving. And you can think of like Method Security building the tools that my co-founder and I wish we always had. My role, I can tell you my role in the US Air Force and my co-founder and CTO's role at the NSA, but I was like a defensive security operator. And so I was operating other security products to try to find bad guys, find risks. And so that means I was like a product expert at things like Splunk and other things that are like your typical security IT stack. And I kind of saw firsthand what worked, what didn't work, what wasn't up to like the mission scale of trying to defend 1 million plus endpoint network.
So you weren't doing offense, like you were doing defense.
Yeah, I was doing defense. I basically fell in love with the mission and the people and, the importance of what we were doing. But I was extremely frustrated by, maybe having an idea about how to do something better. And I could go do a prototype of something new. And then the apparatus of the Department of Defense wasn't equipped to handle a 22-year-old with young ideas like that. And so that left me pretty eternally frustrated.
How long were you there for?
Only a year.
Oh, a short stint. Okay.
I was on a scholarship commitment and I wanted to serve the same mission. So basically right after my commitment was done, I drove right to New York City to start at Palantir. But my CTO was kind of had a similar, I think he was at NSA for 2 years, but he was building tooling. So he was more of like a security developer and he built both tools for the defensive and offensive mission. So he kind of had like a different perspective of a similar problem where I was more of our user and he was more, the engineer, if you will. But we're obviously fusing some of those perspectives to build the company that we're building today.
And then tell me a bit about Palantir. That's another kind of shrouded in secrecy and nowadays super hyped up because the stock has just been ridiculous. So a lot of interest in that too.
Yeah. So I joined Palantir 12 years ago. And the Palantir then, there's a lot of things that are identical, I would say, to the Palantir today. But the thing that a lot don't realize about Palantir back then when my third co-founder is also from Palantir. So 3 of us had worked on projects there previously. But when I got there in 2014, there was no real product. I mean, there was Gotham and it was deployed in some intelligence and special operations type workflows. But especially for the commercial business, what I focused on right out of the gates, we would get access to really hard problems at Fortune 500 type organizations and just build something from scratch.
So it was straight services, like service dev almost kind of business.
Well, we were trying to productize our services in a way and to then get users onto that. And then the global brain of Palantir would try to, this is the FDE model, to try to collect the global learnings and productize that into a platform, which ultimately came Foundry. But in those early commercial days, like 2013 to 2016, there was nothing. We were on our own. It was really hard. Pressure was on. And it was almost like you got these reps at running a little startup But the advantage in why Palantir has produced so many founders is because I got basically 6 reps at starting and mostly failing, my own little companies. I now have just like a lot more operational learnings that I'm productizing and have seen a lot of the problems that I'm seeing today.
It's wild that Palantir worked out the way it did. It's really hard to make that transition from services to product. And I think a lot of tech type services companies want to productize, but fail to. We had in Canada one called Element AI, raised hundreds of millions. Same idea, like let's get very smart AI people, build AI things for companies, and we'll figure out the product. And it completely imploded. So pretty wild story.
It was wild, but just probably nowhere better to start a software career than Palantir. And I'm very fortunate to have been a part of that process.
What were you doing right before you started the startup method?
I worked for a more traditional security software company, and my intent, I was VP of product. It was a detection response company, and I helped them go from Series A to Series C. And that was just a fantastic process to see more traditional security distribution products. Like Palantir was not the right model to try to copy in that regard. Being a government operator doesn't teach you how to distribute and build, like a sales business. And that's what I really learned there. Global sales force, global team, figuring out 2-tier like distribution models, things like that. And those reps were super important into how I'm thinking about building and running Method today.
When did you decide to leave and start Method, and what led to that decision?
For my co-founders and I have basically been trying to poach each other respectively for like the last 7 or 8 years or so.
I love that.
We have like some shared Notion spaces where we've like shared business ideas like every 3 to 6 months, almost over like the last decade. And the ideas kept getting better. And we've actually like circled back to an idea that I had for Method about 8 years ago, which is what we're building now, which is crazy. But there became a moment where AI was specifically, I started prototyping. I'd been prototyping with GPT-2 to see if I could get it to do some interesting security things. This was back like 2020 when those models were open sourced. You can like fine tune them on your local like Ubuntu like laptop or server. And it was kind of dumb. And I didn't quite see it yet. But then when 3.5 and then 3.5 Turbo came out in March 2023, I made a little like penetration test like bot that started to work and started to be able to like pack some things on my local network. And it was in that moment I called my co-founder, Sean. I was like, we have to do this. We have to do it now. We're the only team that could possibly build the thing to help America and help defenders win. So it was like a long buildup, and then it was a single phone call. And like the next day we were all in.
Just to go on a tangent, this idea you have about you already had the team in place, the co-founding team in place well before the idea, is something that's lost on many of the young first-time founders. And like speaking for myself, like when I started that first startup and it was right out of school, right out of college, you just kind of like, I mean, in that case, it was a friend of mine. We just wanted to do stuff together, so we did. And as you go through and you build a career or whatever, you end up meeting different excellent people in different places, and you start to see how the pieces, at least in theory, could fit together. You're like, man, if I could put, you're like making a team like you would a sports team, right? Like if I could put this person in this place, this person in this place. And, obviously there's a lot of 20-some-year-olds that start great businesses, but it is one advantage that you only get somewhere in your late 20s to 30s is when it starts to happen. And a lot of times you hear the stories like that's really how the best teams are built. Like these are people that have worked together, have known each other for a long time, and just know where everyone is going to fit. And ultimately, it's really all about people.
Totally. Yeah, I think, was it the top risk or one of the top risks to early stage companies is like founder breakups. Fortunately, like my co-founders and I have already done a lot of business and projects and things together, and we know how to work with each other. And so there's no risk there, and it's only helped us accelerate. But yeah, there's huge advantage. Like 10, 12 years ago, a representative company where you could build your skill set in your network would be like a Palantir. Maybe a better equivalent today would be like a Ramp, just incredibly talent dense, build your network. And that creates very unfair advantages for doing something like several years after.
So after that phone call, do you all just quit and go full time, or what's the next step?
It took us about 6 months or so to incorporate. I have family and I have kids, so there was like some things there. My, CTO and co-founder was running one of like the most important customers and business units at Palantir. You can't just unplug some of those commitments. And I was also an executive at like a decently sized company, but we started putting things like, ideas in motion that didn't, overlap with our current jobs, and basically committed September, we're all quitting and we're going on this full time.
And this is September, 2023, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And what stage were things at when you did go full time?
stage in terms of like investment or?
Yeah, was there money in? Was the product built? Do you have an MVP? Like, where were things at in general?
I had an MVP, that like little penetration test bot that I made that was basically like our seed pitch. It was pretty funny. My CTO quit Palantir and he had like an 8-year run there, and he was going to go on a vacation to Europe, well deserved, with his wife before he did this thing. And I was like, before you go, we need to fly you out to San Francisco to meet with Andreessen Horowitz like on Monday. He quit Palantir on Friday. And he was like, okay. And then he went on vacation on Tuesday and we closed the seed round like a couple days later. It all just happened so quickly, but we went in basically with like a prototype demo and a couple of slides, and then the process just quickly ended.
How did you raise from A16? Like, what was that process like for that first round?
So my other co-founder, Dan, who runs most of our work with investors and also like our commercial business, he left Palantir in 2022 and had been warming up certain relationships like a year plus in advance. And so he did a lot of the groundwork that allowed us to go like very quickly. The Palantir alumni network and Mafia network also was very advantageous because, you know, folks want to support ex-Palantir founders. There's a lot of former Palantirians that are at some of these investment firms. Like Michelle Volz was an example. She was at A16Z, former Palantirian, and was kind of our first connection there. He was building a relationship with A16Z prior to that like 3-day process. And that allowed like Dan to get to know and trust some of the GPs there that would later on go to support us. So we weren't going into it cold. And we knew obviously for what we're doing, which is at the intersection of AI, security, defense, infrastructure, there's really no better first partner there because they just have such a network and system across those different fronts. So they were at our top of our list. When it came together, it just happened quickly. But Dan especially put in a lot of legwork beforehand to build relationships to make that happen.
How big was that round?
That was a $5.5 million seed round.
And what was the initial idea was it this AI pen testing, or what was the first idea of the product?
Basically the same thing that we're doing today, which the idea was like broader than that first prototype. It was how can we use AI basically for offensive security behaviors to help the good guys stay ahead of threats that are going to be using the same types of like systems. So we've actually been building the exact same idea from the beginning and have not pivoted at all, which I think is mostly we've learned a lot along the way, especially around sequencing. But I think we had such unique market insight because of our background that we're basically just piling that into like this killer business idea that we have a lot of conviction and opinions around.
So maybe if you can take a few minutes and kind of give me the layman's understanding of cybersecurity and where you fit, because, and I've said this to a few other cybersecurity founders that I've had on the show, like from the outside looking in, it's like threat detection, it's like malware. Every time the pitch is kind of like, there's still exposure and like we're going to solve it and we're going to, prevent the bad guys and all this stuff, threat prevention, whatever. But then there's still new companies that come up and they get crazy traction. People buy the product. So there's still so many gaps. Like what is the situation and where exactly does method fit in?
So I would say broadly, I'll start with some of my annoyances of the security market and how we are thinking going against the grain there. We have this joke internally that the security market is called like the cyber industrial complex, which is that it's like this overcalcitration of all these different magic quadrants and acronyms and things that people pledge allegiance to, whereas like there's a significant lack of first principle thinking often. But generally, when starting a new security company, you can either approach it by like the domain in which you're trying to build a product or a platform in. This could be like endpoint, cloud, identity, SOC, or the more type of workflow that you're doing, whether it's more detection or response focused, whether it's more posture focused, whether it's more offensive focused. And where we fit in specific, we've had a strong conviction that like more point products is not the answer. And this just makes things very difficult for security teams and for buyers to actually get results. But it's really hard to go beyond, just a point product, especially in the beginning. So we're swinging big in the sense that we're trying to build a platform, a generalized platform for both posture and offense, which all has to do about understanding like the state configuration and relationships of one's environment. And then with that information, you can know, how to reconfigure to make it more secure or how to attack it to break it. And then there's obviously a virtuous loop by controlling both those things because you can threat-informed break something safely fix it, and then, try it again, almost like an integration test to make sure that you never regress. That like statement of what I just said happens to cut across maybe a dozen like named Gartner Magic Quadrants. And so like we look and feel very different. And so when you to your question, like where do we fit in? Practically speaking, we have numerous competitive fronts, like anything with X posture management, we probably compete with. Anything with, asset management or exposure management adjacent, we probably compete with. Auto penetration test, breach attack simulation, adversary emulation. Those are all things that we are either do or are very competitive with. But the thing that we are selling really is more of like an outcome about resilience. And that is where I think we get a lot of like go-to-market differentiation and, feel different, especially for the earlier adopter security teams where they understand like we can't just assemble 8 different point products across these different things. So we're going to either have to build a better story or maybe someone can like deal with us at our scale. And we just have the technical and go-to-market background to pull it off.
So maybe to kind of clarify, like we just had Shahar from Terra Security on here. They're kind of like AI pen testing sort of thing, right? At least that's how I understood it. Would that be similar to what you do or not so much?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. We view like automated penetration testing as like a use case of our platform. And generally what happens when you have companies that focus on that single use case, they're probably going to make something that's more broadly and widely applicable. Maybe it does like a better job at certain compliance things. You can offer it to like SMB and lower size customers. It's very PLG friendly. We are building something more big and interconnected. So although there might be capability overlap, there's probably practically like no customer overlap. We're targeting Fortune 500, USG, which includes Department of War and like the federal government and state government. And they require something that's a little bit bigger, more intense, a little bit more trustworthy, and something that is more cross-functional in nature. So on the surface, probably competitive, but like practically no. And we think that there's a big enough market to support both approaches.
Once you go full-time and you raise $5 million, do you build for a while? Do you go right away and get like a design partner? Like obviously the bar for deployable MVP in cybersecurity is pretty high. Like how do you structure that?
We probably took a different approach than most. We just built. We didn't really even talk to anyone. I mean, we talked to some folks, but I think the common reaction, and Nikesh from Palo Alto was on like a recent podcast where he talked about this for cybersecurity founders. Like everyone wants to go build their customer advisory board, talk to users and say like, what do you need? What do you need? We just built to our like opinion about the world that we wanted to build and basically just shut everything else out for quite some time. And that's paying off, but it does like produce like a pretty dark period where like no one can quite feel and see your vision for a while. And in our case, because we're building more of a platform product that's cross-functional, that probably took us longer than if we were building like a single opinionated point product.
Do you think it worked because you're from the industry and you were at these big companies, so you had a clear sense of what the requirements and needs were without extra like formal validation?
Exactly. Like if you think about my experience at the Air Force, I was like an operator of some of these like equivalent tools. I know exactly how they work. I know, where the pain points are. My CTO was in a similar seat where he was building offensive tooling and know exactly like what works, how that doesn't work. I took a non-security stint at an AI company called Shield AI, which on the surface has nothing to do with security, obviously, but we were putting AI on drones and fighter jets. And that informed a lot of opinions about how we thought about treating LLMs as like a raw technical material. And so we just packaged all of this stuff into a very opinionated company, but I don't think like maybe a much younger founder could have done. There's lots of different ways to start businesses. Ours was to like really get a lot of experience before like in our early 30s, like starting a company where we thought we had a differentiated advantage on like the knowledge that we had.
How long did you have that like dark build period for?
Longer than I think any of us would have liked. I think 6 months in, we had our first design partnerships. Some of those were Fortune 500 customers. They were like naturally more early adopter, innovator types so that they like knew what they were dealing with, but it was hard for them to like totally see and feel the vision, if that makes sense. But I would say like most of 2024 probably felt like in that darker period where we maintained our conviction that we're going to build a cross-functional platform so that you can basically attack and defend in a single experience. And that just took more than a year to fully build. So I would say like that whole time was kind of more of that darker conviction like type building, even though we had design partners.
Who was like your first design partner? And you can name them or not, but just at the very least, like characterization, kind of who they are.
Yeah, a couple of like multi-billion-dollar like friendly organizations were the first. And those were useful because lower stakes, but like big enough to be like somewhat representative. The next two customers, one was a Fortune 200 customer that has a lot of elite talent on the inside and has a design partnership pipeline. And then the other one was a Department of War service, which, you would never think of a traditional like design partnership with those types, but those were kind of like our big two to start. And then we since kind of like added some other Fortune 500s and like military customers after that. But it was unique because we were able to, for our first Fortune 500 design partner, we were able to put it into production because we had some interesting use cases that were lower stakes in terms of the data access, got access to users. It was a little bit of like walking through the forest to find, the sequencing of things that we should do. And that was really useful. But at the same time, we had this other customer in the military that allowed us unique access to certain types of problems, less like hands-on users. So that design partnership looked and felt very different. But I think we got access to different information that helped us make certain technical bets for a year out that was very advantageous. So having like this mix of one, like users were in it every day and like busting us all the time because this broke, this isn't working. And the other one was very more early stage R&D where they were sharing some about their requirements. We were doing more of like trainings and labs, both of which helped us really create an information advantage for what we've been doing now.
Yeah, maybe, like cybersecurity is a kind of deep topic here, either in it or you're not, but selling to enterprise is something that translates to, just about every vertical. I mean, there's founders everywhere trying to sell to enterprise. So maybe let's just go deeper on that initial phase of design partnerships. You talked a little bit about it here, but like, how did you structure it? How often did you meet? What did you get out of it? What was the end goal? Like, tell us as much as you can about the tactics of selling to enterprise and getting that first like real commercial contract that then, leads to more and more.
Yeah. First, just in the targeting of some of these, there are some organizations in terms of enterprises that are just more naturally going to be better design partners for early stage companies. Like if you're talking to like a large financial institution, like a bank, just don't even talk to them because they're not going to fit in that category. Similarly, if you're talking to a slower moving industrial type company, they're also not going to be good. And so there's a lot of thinking about the shapes of companies and their talent internally and an ability to handle. A lot of these companies, whether it's security or something else, maybe you're taking on like 2 to 3 design partnerships per year. But you want to do a lot of scoping to figure out, okay, who are the buyers that are on LinkedIn that are clearly talking about these things and seem like they're active in the design partnership market. This is something that we did. And in security, it's kind of known like what types of organizations and specifically what CISOs are really good design partnership counterparts. So we had like a pretty shrunk funnel right from the beginning. Then it's about getting the introduction, whether some of them came from our network, like directly or my network. Some of them came from investor network, probably most frequently. I mean, tactically, we would have a list, like a hit list of organizations and the certain people. We would do LinkedIn Venn diagrams of who of our investor network was connected. We would ghostwrite like very specific emails for people to write and try to like get them to get to the first meeting. All of those are like interesting ways to leverage your network to get to the first meeting. But then it's basically all on you to get them to believe in you. And that's all that you are trying to accomplish here. In some cases, products might be like fully baked, like really set and ready to go. Ours was like so big and so new and unfamiliar that it was more bet on the team. And we knew that like in 2024, we were not kidding ourselves that we had, this agentic offensive security monster yet that was like ready for production.
How much are those enterprise pitches like and unlike a VC fundraise pitch?
Probably pretty similar, to be honest. I mean, seed round is betting on the team. Those early design partnerships are betting on the team. So in many ways, very similar. And those, in this case, CISOs, but enterprise like buyer would probably call that investor and ask very similar questions.
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
I asked because I was talking to another startup that was kind of selling, I would say SMB, maybe small mid-market, and they're moving up to small enterprise, let's say. And one of the things is when you show up to a mid-market, it's like, here's the product, here's what it does, and they're going to make a decision. Maybe they talk to other people and they're going to make a decision, and they're buying the product as is today. And if in 6 months somebody else has a better product, maybe they'll churn out and switch. Like, it's just whatever. The future is what, like, you tell them the roadmap is whatever, but like, it's not the important thing. When you talk about an enterprise in general, my understanding is they're thinking about multi-year partnerships. Whether they commit to that or not, their goal is not to jump in with you for a year and then churn out and have to move to somebody else. And so the stuff that matters, obviously, when you think about an investor, we're thinking about 10-year partnerships. And so team matters. Sure, the current product matters, but roadmap matters a lot, right? Vision matters. All these elements that SMB mid-market don't care about, enterprise, very much might prioritize.
Yeah. I mean, it was very much initially selling on the vision. And we had a strong point of view what AI was going to do to the security landscape that some of our early design partners happened to share. So we struck an intersection quickly with that. And then it was about convincing them that we were the most credible team to pull off this thing that they were also interested in, that we happened to have the most convincing point of view on. Convincing them would be like, is our technical talent above and beyond the best? There's all little different techniques to doing that, like where we would deploy our CTO or maybe myself with their engineering manager and just make them feel like they're joining a technical rocket ship, or ensuring that we had certain meetings in person and actually delaying meeting them until that happened, which just shows they're going to bet on the team that they have the opportunity to shake their hands and look them in the eye. And that also allows them to prove we're not 20-year-old founders. We're not messing around and we know what we're doing. And we have done some massive types of business before, and you can trust us. We turned down a lot of initial meetings almost entirely because we just couldn't meet them in person. So that was a pretty explicit strategy that we had. But yeah, and then they want to know tactically, what's the roadmap? How much can we influence the roadmap? How are you going to run this? Show me your stuff today. Can I do a quick trial of it?
And how do you structure? What are you asking for? 50K, 100K? Is it more time commitment you're asking for? What are you trying to get out of the design partnership? Do you bake in the commercial? How do you think about that first kind of thing you're signing?
Well, the earlier it is, the more desperate one is for access and logo. So that is probably an evolving question. And there are many founders, former founders, investors that have strong opinions that you have to ensure that you charge for it so that you're doing something that is worth their time. And we have charged for it in some cases, but in other cases we have not. When you're doing security especially, they're putting you through procurement and also allowing you to have access to certain data is basically a higher bar than writing a 100K check. And so to me, it meets the same, you got to be interested to doing this, and we're certainly not going to waste our own time. We had other tactics that we put in, duration of commitment, weekly time meeting, badge access. And basically those are all blockers for seriousness. And if they say yes, then we know that they're in.
Did you spend time with them afterwards? And you mentioned in person for the first meeting. Did you do that after too?
Yeah. We have a pretty aggressive forward deployed model, not quite like Palantir in that it was a part of the business development arm, but more our engineers were sitting desk side, and we ensured that they had access. And a lot of that is obviously to get a product advantage, but also to build relationships bottoms up that helped us then convert the sale later on.
And then is this kind of how you bootstrap from these more friendly types, and then now you do the same thing with a bit bigger, but you have some proof points. You're I'm working with these two logos, and one thing just leads to another?
Exactly. Yeah. We went from in mid-2024, kind of a 6-month design partnership where we would hope for a 6-month extension because that gave us the time it took to really nail down stuff. And now we're at the point where if we're trying to engage with a new large commercial customer, we will do a 2-hour boot camp. We're so confident in how the product works today. We're just going to do, we say bring these types of users. We're going to do 2 hours. And if we knock your socks off, then we want to do a 2-week POV in production. And then we think that'll be enough information to make a decision.
And is it generally that quick? Because that's a crazy short sales cycle for enterprise.
Well, to get to that boot camp, yes, is not easy. And even to go from successful technical boot camp to then either contract or more committed large pilot is also not easy. To get to the bootcamp, you need to like meet the buyers, and you need like technical middle management, and then you need to align schedules, and it's an enterprise nightmare often. And then even when you get the bootcamp, then you're looking at procurement. Oftentimes, just to do like a pilot, you need to get like waivers for interacting with some of their data in a certain way. And there's a lot of things programmatically to like knock down. We do not look and feel like a PLG company. We're selling pretty big contracts with big customers.
How big? What's the ACV these days?
There's a huge skew between government and commercial, just the nature of what the like government, they're all millions for sure. Commercial side could be like maybe a floor of 500K, then maybe closer to $1 million. But we specifically are taking on like a small, dense customer list to let us build product in a differentiated way and not have to hire. Like we currently have no sales team. We have like 2 people that are not engineers on our team.
How many people on the team total?
We're 19. So I think 16 of them are engineers.
And how much have you raised?
We raised $20 million Series A.
Okay, plus the 5. Right, okay.
Yeah, so like 25.5 total. But we're pretty lean comparatively. Like,
yeah, I was going to say, what drives that, by the way, just given the demand? Like, why not double your team size, for example? What's the philosophy?
there's something about maintaining a small enough engineering team that allows us to be like so artistically generative right now in terms of our output. And I think there is something also about AI tooling is getting legitimately really good. And we think about that a lot. So just like on the engineering side, like if you were to look at our org chart, our CTO has 15 people reporting them. And maintaining that as long as we can, which thank you, Sean, by the way, for have the whole company report to you. But it gives us such an advantage because we have so few like communication nodes of our engineering team and we're shipping so fast. The second we triple our customer count, this will like really probably start to fall apart. But for now, like we are commercially competing our stuff with buyers that have access to anything. And so like we know we have the goods, and because we don't have to think too much about support and sales right now, it's all funneling into product investments.
You know, it's funny. I'm curious to dive in a little bit more on this because I'm all for small teams, but oftentimes it's because the nature of what you're building, you're in this kind of, and maybe you are there, but in this kind of like that flywheel where you're putting things out, you get some feedback on it, you tweak, like you got to have that nimbleness, which is what this flat org chart allows because the communication alignment is so much easier. But in your case, it feels like the specs, I would think from the outside looking in, like the specs are known. It's like, hey, let's go and build this thing because it's enterprise and they kind of have a clear roadmap. Is that not the case? Like even in your world, it's still very much like being able to be nimble and just react quickly is still top in terms of what's important?
For sure, yeah. And what's funny about how our technology has developed and also our engineering team, the architecture and the workflows that we drew on the whiteboard on our first day of starting Method is basically still intact. Like it's still what we're doing. But there's so much learning around the edges and learning about sequencing that is where a lot of our nimble, and then plus how AI has been changing underneath us, that nimbleness and ability for like an engineer to be on site with the user to learn something and for 72 hours later to ship a pretty large feature bet that is pretty game changing that like we could not have possibly anticipated. That's where we're like generating a lot of alpha right now. And we're not formally road mapping like in the super structured way. Like we don't have a lot of like friction in the organization. So everyone is pretty much just coding or talking with users. And so there's a lot of reasons to stay nimble. And I think we can stay like very lean as compared to maybe like Palantir when I was there 12 years ago. Like it just couldn't have possibly been this lean because of, frankly, AI and how we know what we're doing.
Tell me about maybe the first like true like commercial contract you signed. How do you go from a design partnership that's either free or like peanut sort of thing to like a $500,000 $1 million contract?
Well, with enterprise sales, like you have to understand the budgeting process. It's just the reality. And it's probably the same in security as it would be in like infra, data, financial tooling. But big enterprises are likely budgeting for the following 2 years, like a year prior. I mean, the government's even worse, and I can tell you how that works, but it's like all these scales 5x. But if an organization is going to make an in-budget year bet on something new, like you really have to understand where that money is coming from. And they either will have to have something like an AI transformation slush fund or the ability to cancel another vendor contract that you might be like practically competing with, which usually is not possible from how vendors lock in, at least on like an annual cycle. And so you lose a lot of credibility, I've found, if you ignore those facts, because then like the buyer's like, work with me. Like these are my realities.
Yeah, you're pushing on a string and it just shows like your naivete. Like it's just, you can't change that big of an organization as good as your product might be.
Exactly. And so it's, if you meet the buyer where they are and like hopefully you're not like hungry for 6 months of revenue or something like that, there are ways of structuring contracts and like scaling them up over time to like meet where they are in their budgeting cycle so that they can program you for like a year or 2 year out and make sure that that money is available for then. Maybe they can cancel a certain other contract to free up a small sum of money. And so a lot of our initial contracts practically looked like first X months are actually free. Like we like you guys, you like us, like we're here for you. Then we free up some small pot of money that is made available for reasons that you've informed us about. And then after that, there's, more money available, or we're going to put that into the contract that it's actually going to have that step up so that you kind of have guarantees of that. Of course, there's usually opt-out clauses for any of these things, which gives the buyer like, you kind of need to do that because they're still trusting you to execute the roadmap. But this gains a lot of trust and credibility, and then also allows you to just like meet the realities of that organization.
What's the trigger point? Like at what point do you get to it and say, okay, cool, like we've done enough on this design partnership. Let's move to contracting and figure out whatever that step up looks like.
Yeah. I wish there was a scientific answer. There's not. And this is something like the Palantir training had a lot of help here. A lot of my job at Palantir was to run these pilots, which are kind of like design partnerships, scope them, and then sell the C-suite at the end of it. And so we know a lot of tricks on how to do that. Like the users have to be singing your praises. You need to have like users that are able to come in and demo to the C-suite and talk to them in like first person, not have the vendor talk to you about that, which means that you have to have the goods. Obviously, you need to have users trained. You need to make sure that you know the incentives of the buyers. What do they care about? Do they care about the board? Do they care about being promoted? Like, how can you play into that in some way? But if you don't have that full story, you can't push for the sale because it's like you're not going to win. And so then that becomes like a decision of, do we want to extend the design partnership? Do we want to do some kind of like pause and like we'll come back when we have the goods that we're clearly hearing the feedback on the ground, like XYZ is super important for you. It's going to be 5 more months or something like that. And so like, can we re-engage then? Or maybe you feel confident you want to go for the sale and you just go for it. There's so many factors there, but the founding team has to have like that barometer of it's time or it's not time. And you have to be setting up these design partnerships at the right time for your company's trajectory to not like keep shooting yourself in the foot either. Like it's okay to take some losses to learn, but you can't like keep signing these things up and like setting up 4-week design partnerships where you're not going to have the goods in 4 weeks. So it takes a lot about like knowing where you're at, where you're going, where the customer's at, what they want. And then like maybe saying, we actually want to start this design partnership with you in 3 months because then I know that I'm going to have the goods then. And we can actually do like a 6-week design partnership. At the end of that, we're going to be confident we can get the materials that we need to say yes. And so it's constantly like shifting all these schedules and relationships around. And that is why I think founder-led sales in particular, where you're controlling sales, BD, and product all at once, the only way that it really works in the beginning.
Once you launch, like how long did it take to hit $1 million ARR?
Well, this is where the government is maybe like, we know how to sell to the government. We have sold to the government. We've made more than $1 million on our first contract. So
it's
maybe
like
the wrong question for us.
Right. That makes sense.
But I mean, that speaks to the advantage of being able to like credibly go after dual use. Is the government is a really difficult customer that has a pretty big, budget for things that we're talking about. And if you know how to deliver to them, which is not something you can just like wake up and decide, I'm going to support the Department of War now. You have to be like born for this and have the experience to do it. They can work with you on like helping fund parts of your roadmap, like procuring things in really advantageous ways. And all this administration's like different policy legislation and like executive mandates are making it a very good time to being able to do that type of work, either as a single use focused defense company or a dual use, but you have to know how to navigate that maze. It's not easy.
And now that you're, on this kind of 1 to 10 or whatever path, how do you do this enterprise sales more repeatedly, especially top of funnel? Like, how are you going? Is it events? Is it pure network? Like, what is the method, the go-to-market method?
It's network. I mean, because we're focused so much on Fortune 500 and the US government, our CRM is like on a single page spreadsheet. You know, it's like, we're not doing like a full scale top of funnel like sales motion. And so like we can just look at all the organizations that we want to deploy with. There's certain ways to like filter that down to know like where do we have connections with, where do we think we have really strong product market fit with. And that could be a combination of knowing their industry. Like there are certain industries that we're more equipped to handle, knowing maybe like the background of their CISO. It's just like a tactically useful thing for them. If they have a military background, they're much more likely to take the first call and like take a bet on method. That's just because then there becomes like this shared dual use mission that is really exciting. Do they have a red team, which is like one of our big user groups? And if so, like what is the size of that team? Like 5 plus or minus 2 is a really nice sweet spot for us. And so we can do a lot of like pre-filtering. And then that list of 500 then becomes like 100. And then we just hit that list. And now we have a really nice like bootcamp motion where when we get them interested, we have a really clear motion to basically prove to them that we have the goods.
Perfect. Well, let me stop it there and ask the 3 questions we always end on. When was a time that you felt like you'd found true product market fit?
Product market fit for like an enterprise motion like we're doing, it's really different than like a PLG style, like where you can just look at like crap, like people are just using this thing. For us, I think there's a couple of things. We met with a certain customer that did a ton of market research into all potential solutions that were in kind of the offensive security space, which is a space that we play a lot in. And they went from market research to deciding to choose method in such a rapid time frame on a dollar amount that was like unprecedented for us. This happened to be a government customer. And that time frame was just like so remarkably tight that I knew like, okay, this team could have anything. And they chose us. And they chose us very quickly. So like that specific feeling was like part of product market fit. And then the other one that's maybe more classic, like product focus, is that we started to have recurring usage of like certain types of user groups after we were just grinding with them over and over again, which is a more classic marker. But honestly, I feel both sides, but when those connect on the same customer, then it's like we've got lightning in a bottle.
You've been on a pretty fast journey. I mean, the company's only like 2 or so years old, but was there ever a time when you thought things wouldn't work out, like maybe even things could fail?
That 2024 dark period that I mentioned was probably the time. Again, to reiterate, we're building differently. We're building to our personal strong opinions. And in the beginning, did not take a lot of feedback about that. We had a very specific point of view about like where AI was going, the infrastructure needed to make it productive and trustworthy in security. And that was not like a weekend project. That was like a year-long project. And before a lot of those foundations were completed, it was hard for others to completely see and feel that vision. And so in that like 2024, even early 2025 time, we would get constant feedback from CISOs, users, and investors alike of like, you're trying to do too much, narrow in, like just sell like this little widget and like don't do that. And it's hard to like, frankly, it's hard to keep believing in yourself where you keep opening yourself up to negative reactions like that. And at some point we just had to like, my co-founders and I was like, we're just not going to talk to anyone for a little bit. We're just going to like continue to put our heads down, and this is either going to work big or it's not going to work. And I think it's working, but that was a very dark time that it was hard to not be influenced by all these like negative like signals from the outside market that just like couldn't see, couldn't believe.
And what would be like your number one piece of advice for an early stage founder that's looking for product market fit?
Bet on yourself. I think first time founders often think that they can just like talk to users and like find the answer to their problems, and we're just not. And it's not to say that you shouldn't talk to users, but you need to have a very clear idea that like no one is going to tell you how to like build your business, because if they could, then they would do it. And so you just need to be like very calculated around your convictions, you know, where to take input in, like how not to take too much input in, and just going for it. But then once you have like that conviction, I think all the clear measures of rapid sales cycles, like sticky usage, recurring usage, like displacing other products, like all apply. But that upfront part which, YC and others have like highly popularized. Like there is no replacement for talking to users, but like you started this company, it's only going to work if like it's your idea and no one else is going to tell you your idea. So just bet on yourself.
Sam, it was great having you on the show, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Likewise. Thanks, Pablo.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. Send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.